2022 was quite a memorable year for us at Big Banana Productions. That holds true for a multitude of reasons, as we visited places both old and new to soak in the incredible sights of steam and diesel locomotives thundering past our cameras. As another year draws to a close, it's time for us once again to reflect and look back on all the iconic moments and memories we've made this year, on our adventures capturing history in the world of railroading. In 2022, we documented 11 different steam locomotives, as well as several vintage diesels in 7 different states. We partook in numerous photo charters that aimed to recreate various different eras in American railroading's colorful past, along with thrilling to the upbeat chases of all-day excursion trains. From a compound articulated Mallet in the mountains of Maryland to an eccentric collection of classic diesels in New York State. From a Lima Berkshire forging through 3 states in one day out in the Midwest, to the long-awaited return of one of America's most iconic excursion stars in Pennsylvania Anthracite Country. All the while enjoying the fun with friends and family. With all the fantastic times we had, and the stimulating sights we've witnessed this year, let's take a look at some of our favorite scenes, as Big Banana Productions presents the best of 2022. We began 2022 right where we ended 2021, at the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad with their newly restored former Chesapeake and Ohio Mallet number 1309. During the last weekend in February, Trains magazine hosted the Welcome Back 1309 photo charter, which had become one of the most anticipated steam events in the nation ever since restoration began on the locomotive in 2014. Pulling a 12-car mixed freight complete with a caboose, 1309 put on a spirited show performing scores of run-bys at several locations along the former Western Maryland main line between Cumberland and Frostburg, Maryland. We were among a strong band of 100 steam fans and photographers from 27 states who made the trek to Cumberland for this grand occasion. After sitting dormant for a few years with a lack of photo charters taking place, extensive brush cutting was made to the selected run-by locations by the members of Trains magazine, along with assistance from the railroad. We'll see several different scenes from this sensational event, including a run-by at the famous Helmstedter's Curve. In March, we visited the Everett Railroad in Pennsylvania to see 260 number 11 starting off the railroad's 2022 season with the Steam into the Cove excursion, operating a good portion of the short line's trackage between Hollidaysburg and Martinsburg, Pennsylvania. During the previous winter, the decision was made to convert number 11 from a coal-burning locomotive to an oil-fired engine, and these trips marked some of the very first runs of her as an oil burner as the railroad breaks her in for another busy season. Number 11 puts on a great show crossing the Juniata River Bridge, before we see her passing a farm near the south end of the line at Martinsburg Junction. Early April took us to the Black River and Western Railroad in New Jersey for their steam photo special that aimed at recreating the early days of the lively tourist line in the early 1970s. A great amount of detail was put into making the event feel very reminiscent of the era, from vintage automobiles to staged actors with period clothing, and of course, giving the star of the show, 280 number 60, a complete retro makeover. The locomotive was backdated to her 1970s era appearance, with white trim painted on the running boards and drivers, along with a classic lettering applied to the tender. Pulling a mixed freight consist, number 60 looked and sounded great, and the weather was picture perfect all day long. Run-bys took place along the railroad's regular excursion route between Ringo's and Flemington, New Jersey, and highlights included staged scenes at the former Central Railroad of New Jersey depot in Flemington, along with sunset run-bys at the Copper Hill Trestle. On April 26th, for the first time in over 30 years, the awesome sight of a Reading T1 was seen thundering down her home rails, just as she did in the 1950s. After a 6-year, multi-million-dollar restoration, the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern Railroad brought back to life their home-built relic, T1 484 number 2102. The hefty coal hauler's return to action was one of the biggest steam stories of 2022. Following several shorter test runs with the locomotive, it was time to put the O2 to the test in order to assure she could handle the Iron Horse Rambles excursions that would follow later in the year. The result was the surreal and exhilarating sight of 2102 hauling a string of no less than 50 empty coal hoppers between Reading and Jimthorpe, Pennsylvania. For those trackside, witnessing such a feat was simply unreal. Her chilling stag talk was a spectacle to behold, as she struggled to grasp her footing on the wet rails at Nesquehoning Tunnel, shortly after departing Jimthorpe bound for Tamaqua. Making her official public debut on Memorial Day weekend, 2102 had a busy schedule during the spring and summer of 2022, hauling the fabled Iron Horse Rambles excursions between Reading and Jimthorpe, in homage to the famous trips of the same name that graced much of these same rails in the early 1960s. These trips brought in thousands of people, taking in the action from both trackside and on board the sold-out excursions. We were on hand to cover 3 of 2102's comeback outings throughout the summer, from her debut excursion on May 28th, as well as another ramble on September 3rd. Perhaps the most exciting of these rambles took place on August 13th, when 2102 teamed up with the Reading and Northern's other iconic steam star, 462 number 425, in a spectacular doubleheader. Here are some highlights from all 3 days. returned to the Western Maryland on Father's Day weekend to chase 1309 on the railroad's regularly scheduled Frostburg Flyer excursions. These runs were unique in that the railroad partnered with the Pennsylvania Railroad T1 Steam Locomotive Trust, fitting the group's Pennsylvania Railroad 3-chime whistle on 1309 for 2 days during the weekend. The whistle will be the voice of T1 Duplex number 5550, currently under construction by the Trust. Let's have a listen to this beautiful whistle as 1309 works upgrade passing under an original Western Maryland signal bridge at Trimble Road. During June and July, we attended a pair of private photo charters on the New York and Lake Erie Railroad in upstate New York, which featured the railroad's distinct and sharp-looking collection of Alco diesel locomotives. The trio included matching former Canadian National FPAs numbers 6758 and 6764, as well as former Erie Railroad S1 number 308, as they headed up the railroad's passenger consist. In addition to covering the regular excursion route between Gowanda and South Dayton, New York, the specials traversed rare mileage south of South Dayton to Cherry Creek, as well as on the former Erie's Cattaraugus branch south of Dayton, New York. We also shot some of the railroad's regularly scheduled runs in order to present a detailed look at this scenic route, which was featured in the filming of several feature films, including The Natural and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Actors and vintage automobiles added great ingenuity to each scene, making them feel very reminiscent of the late 1960s. Returning to the Reading and Northern, we see number 425 powering the Rotary Club of Mountaintop Steam Train Excursion, an all-day round trip from Mountaintop to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania and return. This was the first time since 2019 that this excursion was operated, and seeing steam on the northern reaches of the R&N system again was certainly a welcome sight. We'll take a brief look at the Reading and Northern's F units numbers 270 and 275 as they head up the Lehigh Gorge Scenic Railways trips, before watching 425 put on a fantastic show as she storms up grade at Keen Apple Curve on the return to Mountaintop. Our biggest adventure of 2022 found us making a return to the Midwest to chase Nickel Plate Road number 765 powering the newly formed Indiana Rail Experience, an operation formed in partnership between the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society and host railroad Indiana Northeastern. We were there to cover the Tri-State Scenic Steam Excursions, an all-day 100-mile round trip from Eden, Ohio to Hillsdale, Michigan and return, passing through Indiana along the way. The route traversed the rails of the old Wabash and New York Central Railroads and gave the 765 a chance to put on a dramatic show, leading the train for the entire run. Adding to the excitement were spectacular photo run-bys that were performed at Ray, Indiana, on the Indiana-Michigan border. We documented all three excursions in August and October, giving an in-depth look at the entire operation. On one day, 765 wore the whistle of Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis 484 number 576, currently undergoing restoration in Nashville, Tennessee. Here are just some of the many great scenes from these excursions. Meeting up with 765 in Hillsdale for the August excursions were the Little River Railroad's two steam locomotives, 040T number 1 and 462 number 110. During the layover, the 1 and 110 led passengers on a short trip throughout the Hillsdale yard limits in a push-pull fashion, with number 1 leading the train on the outbound run and number 110 heading up the return trip. Later in the year, on the first weekend of October, we catch number 110 on the first pumpkin train excursion of the season from the railroad's home base in Coldwater to Quincy, Michigan, doing track speed as she makes up for lost time after a brief stop earlier in the run. On the last weekend of October, we're back at the Reading and Northern to watch 2102 pulling the Autumn Leaf excursion trains between Reading and Jimthorpe, Pennsylvania. The day we filmed was near perfect, and the fall colors were still near peak on the trees that dot the surrounding mountains. 2102 put on a fabulous show with her sold-out train as she rolled past the tranquil setting of Lake Hotto, before battling the steep climb up the grades of Hometown Hill in beautiful afternoon sunlight. Early November found us at the Western Maryland once again, this time for another photo charter with 1309 hosted by Trains Magazine. For this occasion, 1309 pulled a train made up entirely of coal hoppers, paying homage to her in-service days as a heavy coal hauler on the C&O, and worked hard to keep her footing on the sharp curves and ruling grades that dominate the Connellsville extension. Like the February special, a great deal of brush cutting was done to numerous photo locations, a majority of which had not been used in several years. A grand time was had by all who attended the charter, and the weather held out as well, with some incredible sunshine for a select few shots. 1309 is seen at some impressive photo locations, including the 914-foot-long brush tunnel. The following week saw Laro Photography hosting a pair of photo charters on the Strasburg Railroad, with visiting Norfolk and Western Class J 484 number 611. The events featured a full day of run-bys on the fabled 4.5-mile short line through Pennsylvania Dutch Country. with 611 pulling a string of Strasburg's historic and beautifully maintained passenger coaches. We attended the events on November 10th and were graced with beautiful sunshine and blue skies for nearly the entire day. We also see Strasburg's own former Norfolk & Western M-Class 480 number 475 on the regularly scheduled passenger trains, perfectly adding to the day's N&W theme. The Queen of Steam stole the show from sunrise to sunset, even having a friendly race with a 1931 hot rod. The subsequent 2 days had more photo charters in store that were hosted by Dynamo Productions. The first of the two was at the Northern Central Railway in southern Pennsylvania. The event set out to capture the flavor of the late 1800s, and with the many historic buildings that dot the region, along with the quaint and rolling countryside of York County, the feeling of early American railroading in the late 19th century came about very quickly. Heading up the train was the railroad's replica 440 number 17, pulling a mixed train that featured the Northern Central's newly restored former Delaware and Hudson gondola, along with a trio of passenger coaches. Unfortunately, the weather had its own plans for the day, with a tropical storm wreaking havoc on the area, resulting in a literal non-stop raining day. Despite the torrential downpours, the charter pushed onwards, with canopies supplied by the dynamo team to keep the attendees and their camera equipment dry. The rainy weather also made for some dramatic scenes as number 17 struggled to keep her traction on the slippery rails. With an ensemble of actors on hand to star in various scenes, the old-time atmosphere was further enhanced on a railroad with a deep and impressive history. Spectacular night run-bys rounded out the day's events, including scenes staged at the historic Howard Tunnel. The second Dynamo Productions photo charter took place the following day at the Middletown and Hummelstown Railroad in Middletown, Pennsylvania. The locomotive featured in the event was former Western Maryland Railway S6 number 151, heading up a mixed freight consist. With period actors and a 1965 Ford Thunderbird also on hand, the stage was set to recreate the scenes of typical branch line freight operations in the early 1970s. One of the unique features of the railroad is the street running section along Brown Street in Middletown, home to the classic Cuppy's Diner and its retro neon sign. Let's see a pair of run-bys from the day's activities. After 15 years of traversing the road of anthracite, Reading and Northern number 425's time in the limelight would temporarily come to a close in December of 2022, as the time on her boiler flues expired, requiring an FRA-mandated inspection and rebuild. As a send-off to the 4 1/4, the Reading and Northern put 425 in charge of 2 different weekends of Santa Claus excursions, and we were there to cover all the action on both the Tamaqua excursions to New Ringgold and the hometown High Bridge, as well as her final runs on the trips between Reading and Port Clinton. We caught 425 at some neat places along the railroad, both notable and lesser known, in varying weather conditions from bright blue skies to pouring rains. While the rebuild isn't expected to last for long, we felt it was very fitting to document one of our favorite locomotives that has appeared on our channel many times over the last 3 years for one final time before she fades from the high iron for a while. Atop Price Hill, we watch as 1309 performs another run-by at Helmstedter's Curve in golden late afternoon sunlight. Before we end our look back at 2022, we'd like to give a special thanks to all of our subscribers and supporters for coming along for the ride with us this year, and continuing to join us on our never-ending quest in search of steam locomotives near and far. Thank you all for watching in 2022, and we will see you in a very exciting 2023.